Rick pays a visit to our meat man Daryl, and we get down to business in the kitchen. Welcome to Close to the Bone, Surgeons and Chefs. I'm your host, Allan Shewchuk, and you know, it really is true, you should never look a gift horse in the mouth. But you'd be making a big mistake not to look in some other mouths, because you'd be missing out on some beautiful cuts of beef and pork, and that's what we're going to do on today's show. Dr. Rick's going to visit our meat man Daryl, and he's going to sniff out some calf's tongue and some pig snouts. Professor John's going to tell us about these highly developed and sensitive organs in our animal friends. Later, I'll be joined in the kitchen by our very special guest, ear, nose, and throat specialist, Dr. Joe Dort, and he and I are going to scope out some old world recipes for tongue and snout that you're going to love. But first, let's hear a little bit more about our guest surgeon, Dr. Joe Dort.
We treat a broad range of problems, and so the common things that people think of or associate with us are the things like sinus disease and sore throats, tonsil disease, and tubes in the ears, and voice problems. We do surgery in the voice box area, and the whole area of cosmetic surgery. Otolaryngologists are quite active in that, in the the head and neck and facial area. I went with my sons and a friend, and we took some sailing courses and learned how to sail and find a nice little bay to anchor in, and you put the anchor down and try to cook up something special. And one of the meals I remember last year that I cooked was a chicken curry dish, and it's always a challenge cooking on a sailboat, but that was a pretty special memory for me, and we had a great time.
Up next, Dr. Rick hooks up with our meat man Daryl, and we get down to business in the kitchen.
Hey Rick.
Daryl, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. So what's on the menu today?
Well, today we're going to look for some cow's tongues and some pig snout.
Okay, I think we can sniff you something out in the back.
Okay, let's go. Well, it's pretty obvious what these are right here, Daryl.
They are pig sniffers.
Do you get very much demand for these?
No, not nowadays. But in the olden days, we used to get these in for making old-fashioned head cheese. And you would cure them, cook them, chop them up, mix them with pork tongue and the gelatin and spices, and make a real old-fashioned head cheese out of them.
Well, these are two pretty big tongues right here, Daryl.
Well, they're actually not too big for a beef tongue. It's actually quite small. These are calf tongues. A normal cattle tongue would be about this long, and it would be about this fat on the end.
When I look at this, it's very long. There's actually a lot of meat right at the base. Is that the way it
Yeah, generally it's a little more tender right down here. Near the tip it gets a little bit tougher. And yeah, it's not used a whole lot nowadays. When we get tongue in, we usually cure and smoke them for smoked tongue. And we also do a jellied beef tongue too, or jellied pork tongue.
Hi, welcome back to the kitchen. Here with our very special guest, Dr. Joe Dort. Welcome.
Thanks, Alan. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. You're an ear, nose, and throat specialist?
I am.
How are you with tongues?
Pretty good, actually. A large part of my business is tongue-related.
Well, a large part of our cooking is tongue-related today.
Oh.
And in fact, we're going to get our licks in pretty good on some beautiful calf's tongue. And what can you tell us about a tongue? Is this, what are we looking at here?
Well, I'd like to have a closer look at the tongue.
And what do you have to do that with?
Oh, these are magnifying loupes. They're special glasses that we use for getting up close with our patients.
Well, let's get up close with our tongue.
This is actually very much like a human tongue.
Okay, well, let's
in some ways
give it a tilt here. Tell us what we're looking at.
Well, this is the anterior part of the calf's tongue. Here, you can see it's very smooth.
Yeah, you're right. It's really smooth.
Yeah, it's quite smooth. And then as we go back behind this little cleft, which is the portion of the tongue that divides the anterior into the posterior, we can see that the posterior part of the tongue is a little rougher, very much like the human tongue.
Right, this almost has a feeling like fish scales to it. It's really hard.
Quite rough and not smooth at all.
So is that really what we're looking at here when we have the scaly things? Is that where people and animals taste, is with those?
Yes. The little taste receptors are buried in there, and they're all over the tongue. These, in this particular specimen, are more obvious. Yeah. Let's look at the other side.
Sure. Now look at that. Here, let me just show everyone that this looks like a beautiful cut of meat, almost like some of the ribs we've been cooking on the show and some of the flank steak. What can you tell us about the bottom of the tongue?
Well, this here, the tongue, as you probably know, is a very muscular organ. It's almost completely made up of muscle. And that's because it's designed to move in and out, up and down, all different ways. And because of that, it has a lot of muscle. And we can see that here in the calf's tongue. All of this here is muscle, and in a cow we'd call muscle meat. So,
in fact, you know, as we found with a lot of the cuts of meat when we're cooking them, the more of a muscular function it plays, the better the cut of meat. And today we're going to make it in a Mexican style or Pueblo style. All right, well, we're ready to do our tongue recipe now, so I'm going to ask you to put that in a nice big pot. What you want is a nice pot, so I want to get you to slide that right in. And because we're doing this Mexican style, one of the secrets of this is some cooking liquid that's particularly Mexican. So if I can get you to just, you know, withhold your desire to have that. We'll have some of those later when we serve this up. But we want 2 balls of Mexican beer to start as our cooking liquid. Now, we're going to slow cook this for about 2.5 to 3 hours and boil. And we're just going to add, you don't have to chop these very fine, we're going to add some onions, a nice big stick of celery, and a carrot that I've broken up. As another base for flavor, classic, some 3 bay leaves, 10 peppercorns, about a tablespoon of cumin seeds, going to give us a nice taste, and a little pinch of allspice, also very Mexican. You know, we talked about the meat in that tongue needing to cook for a long period of time. That's going to boil for about 2.5 or 3 hours, and then you want to take it off and cool. Now, I actually did this yesterday, so I've got one that's nicely cooled, so I'm just going to move this one off, and then you and I can see the finished product. So, voila. Right. Don't be shy. Let's get it back into our cutting board and we can see what it looks like after it's been boiled.
it's quite a bit firmer now.
Yeah, and that's what we're looking for.
It's got a little curl to it, though.
It does. It does. It's so let's put that back on our cutting board and we can talk a little bit more about what's happened to this. Cut that right in half so we can take a look at the beautiful meat inside of that.
Okay,
it might be
let's
easier
do
to
that.
peel.
We just finish off here with this.
Sure.
This big baby. There we are.
Now.
Oh yeah.
And you can see, this almost looks like the top of a portobello mushroom, but it's a beautiful, beautiful meat in here. That's just spectacular tasting. And if you were not to cut it in half, you could actually just put this on a meat slicer and slice it into slices for a sandwich. So what we're going to do is I'm going to get you to skin this for me. And just get in there, and if you want some finer surgical
let's see if we can get a scalpel up here.
All right. There's a couple there. Yeah. If that's more what you're used to, cooking with a little finer knife, that'd be great. So
we'll see, just maybe if we can get this thing going.
All right.
I mean, skinning the tongue's not something that we normally do.
Well, I hope not. Now, while Dr. Joe is doing that, I'm going to get our Pueblo sauce ready. So what you need is another heavy bottom, sort of a saucepan.
It's okay if I waste a little meat here.
It is, yeah. We got a lot of tongue meat there that we're going to use. So I'm just going to turn the stove on here, get our pan warmed up. I'm going to get some olive oil going in this pan, a couple tablespoons of olive oil.
Well, that sounds good.
Yeah. Cooking fat is always essential. So, nice simple recipe here. It's going to give us a lot of flavor. I'm going to start with a couple of onions that are sliced very thinly. Get them in our pan. A couple of tablespoons of minced garlic. Then what we're going to add to this to give it a lot of taste is some Mexican flavoring.
What are you going to use for that?
Well, I've got 2 kinds of chilies here. I've got some wonderful chipotle chilies in an adobo sauce, very smoky and very hot chilies. And I've got 3 of those chopped up. You can buy these in any specialty store now, actually in most supermarkets. So you want 3 of those chopped up. And then I've got 2 Anaheim or any mild green chilies that's been skinned and roasted. So we're going to have some really nice layers of taste in here. How are we doing on our tongue?
Oh, it's coming.
I've got about 1.5 cups of the reserved tongue stock. put that into our food processor. I've got a nice 28-ounce can of big Italian plum tomatoes, which I drained really well. Those are going to go in as well. So you can see where we're going with this sauce. It's going to be a nice tomatoey chili sauce. And then into this I'm going to add about a tablespoon of ground coriander, some more allspice, so it's going to match up with the spice we had in our boiling liquid. So you're just working on your tongue, the onions are coming along. I'm just going to get this processed here. And you want it fairly smooth. The tomatoes are whole, so you want it fairly smooth. There we go. Now how are you coming there?
I think I've modified my technique a bit here, and you can actually see some of the anatomy here as you get deeper in. So this big thing here, that's the lingual artery, the artery that supplies the blood supply to that side of the tongue. So that sort of popped out at me as I was chopping away.
Well, we're in familiar territory now.
Yeah,
this is good. This is really good.
Comfortable here.
Okay, this is good. Now what you want to do now is we've got our puree of tomatoes and some stock from the tongue and all those spices. We want to add that into our pan, and you can see what we're doing here, a real classic, almost a stew dish, right? And tongue really lends itself to that. So there we go. Now we're going to cut the tongue up now, and what we want to do is we want to either cube it or slice it. And you know, we've cut the tongue in half already. I think we could just cut it into some nice slices. So why don't I get you to do that? Sure. Cut it into, yeah, a little bigger than that. We want maybe...
You want chunks.
A quarter of an inch, sure. Yeah, we want something substantial to put our fork into. Oh, that's beautiful. Now I'm just going to say,
fingers.
You can see what a beautiful meat this is, marbled with fat, and really, really tender towards the top. It's going to be beautiful when it's stewed for about 30 minutes in this. I'm going to get you to put that tongue into the stew, and we'll finish chopping. I'm just going to say, to serve this one, a nice classic old world, and in this case a Mexican dish, what I've done is I've just taken some of the tongue stock and some of the juice from the tomatoes that we drained, and I've got some beautiful white northern or cannellini beans in here. I've spiced it up with a little bit of garlic and salt and pepper, and this is going to make a wonderful accompaniment to our tongue. So there's a beautiful tongue recipe. This has got to cook for about 30 minutes. Beans got to get warm, so ready to move on?
Absolutely.
All right, when we come back, we're going to cook some wonderful pig snout, so don't go away.